Welcome to Fairy Tales English Journey. Today we will read a very sad but beautiful story. It is about a little girl in the cold winter snow. She has no warm clothes and no food. She only has matches to sell. Let us learn English while we explore her heartbreaking vision of warmth and light. Learning English with fairy tales is a wonderful way to improve your vocabulary. You will hear new words and practice your listening skills. This classic story was written by Hans Christian Andersen many years ago. It teaches us about kindness and compassion. Listen carefully to the words and let the story touch your heart today. The story takes place on the last evening of the old year. It was New Year Eve and the weather was freezing cold. Snow fell heavily from the dark sky. The streets were covered in white snow and ice. People hurried home to their warm houses. They wanted to celebrate the holiday with their families. In the cold and gloomy streets walked a poor little girl. She had no hat to cover her head. She had no shoes to protect her feet from the freezing snow. Her old clothes were thin and torn. She shivered in the bitter wind as she walked alone through the quiet and dark city streets. When she left her house early that morning, she was wearing large slippers. But the slippers belonged to her mother and they were much too big for her. She lost both of them when she ran across the street to escape two fast carriages. Now her bare feet were red and blue with the cold. In her old apron she carried a large bundle of matches. She held one small box of matches in her frozen hand. She had walked all day long, but nobody bought any matches from her. Nobody gave her a single coin. She was very hungry and very cold. She felt completely miserable and very tired. Snowflakes fell on her beautiful long blonde hair. Her hair curled softly around her pale neck. But she did not think about her pretty hair or the cold snow. She only looked at the bright lights shining from the windows of the warm houses. She could smell the delicious roasted goose cooking for the holiday. She knew it was the last night of the year. She could not go home because she had sold no matches. She had earned no money at all. She was afraid her father would beat her if she returned with empty hands. Besides, her own home was just as cold as the dark winter street. Her family lived up in an old attic under the roof. The wind whistled through the large cracks in the walls. They tried to block the cold wind with straw and old rags, but it was never enough. The little girl finally found a corner between two tall brick houses. She sat down right there. She pulled her little legs up close to her body to stay warm. But she grew colder and colder in the freezing night air. Her little hands were almost dead with cold. She thought about striking just one match against the brick wall. One small match could warm her freezing fingers for a short moment. She hesitated for a long time. Finally, she pulled one match from the box. She struck it against the rough wall. It made a sharp sound and burst into a bright flame. The match burned with a warm and yellow light. It looked like a tiny candle in her small and shaking hands. She held her hands over the small flame. It was a wonderful and magical light. The little girl suddenly felt as if she were sitting in front of a large iron stove. The stove had polished brass knobs and shining brass ornaments. The fire burned beautifully inside the stove and gave out comforting heat. She stretched out her cold feet to warm them by the magical stove, but suddenly the small flame went out. The beautiful iron stove vanished into the dark night. She was left sitting in the freezing cold snow. She only held the small burnt piece of the wooden match in her tiny frozen hand. She took another match and struck it against the wall. It burned brightly and the light fell upon the brick wall. The wall suddenly became transparent like a thin veil. She could see right into the room behind the wall. A table was covered with the pure white cloth and fine painted china plates. In the center of the table was a wonderful roasted goose. The goose was stuffed with sweet apples and dried plums. It smelled absolutely delicious. Then something amazing happened in her vision. The roasted goose jumped down from the lovely dish. It waddled across the floor directly toward the poor and hungry little girl. The goose had a knife and a fork stuck in its back. It waddled all the way up to the little girl. But then the second match went out completely. The magical vision disappeared into the cold air. She could only see the thick and damp brick wall of the dark alleyway once again. She felt so sad and hungry. She decided to light a third match. The flame flared up, and she found herself sitting under a magnificent Christmas tree. It was much larger and more beautifully decorated than any tree she had ever seen. Thousands of bright candles burned brightly upon its green and fresh branches. Colorful pictures and beautiful ornaments hung from the green branches. They looked like the wonderful toys she had seen in the shop windows. The little girl reached her hands toward the beautiful lights. But then the third match went out. The thousands of Christmas candles rose higher and higher into the dark winter sky. She watched the bright candles float up into the night. They turned into bright and shining stars. One of the stars suddenly fell from the sky. It left a long trail of fire across the dark night. The little girl looked up at the sky and thought about what the falling star might mean. Her old grandmother had always been very kind to her. Her grandmother was the only person who had ever loved her. But her grandmother had passed away. The old woman once told her that a falling star means a soul is going up to heaven. The little girl remembered those gentle and loving words now. She struck another match against the rough brick wall. The light shone brightly in the dark alley. In the glowing light, she saw her dear old grandmother. Her grandmother looked very clear and bright. She had a gentle and loving smile on her face. The little girl felt so happy to see her again. The little girl cried out to her grandmother in the cold night. She begged her grandmother to take her away. She knew her grandmother would disappear when the match burned out. She knew the beautiful vision would vanish just like the warm stove and the roasted goose and the magnificent and bright Christmas tree. She wanted to keep her grandmother near her for as long as possible, so she quickly struck all the remaining matches in the bundle. She rubbed them against the wall to make a huge and bright fire. The matches burned with such a brilliant light that it became brighter than the middle of the day. Her grandmother had never looked so tall and so beautiful before. The old woman smiled warmly and reached out her arms. She took the little girl in her arms and held her tightly. They flew up together in brightness and joy. They flew high above the earth where there was no cold and no hunger. They went to a place where there was no pain and no fear. They were finally together in heaven. The cold winter night continued on the earth below them. The freezing wind blew through the quiet streets. But the little girl did not feel the bitter cold anymore. She was completely safe and very warm. The next morning the sun rose and shone on the quiet city. The people came out of their warm houses to celebrate the new year. In the corner between the two tall brick houses, they found the little girl. She was leaning against the wall with rosy cheeks and a soft smile on her lips. The little girl had frozen to death on the last night of the old year. The bright morning sun shone upon her small and still body. She sat there holding the burnt matches in her tiny hands. One bundle of matches was completely burned out. The people gathered around and looked at her with pity. The people whispered to each other about the poor little girl. They said she must have tried to warm herself with the matches. They saw the burnt pieces of wood scattered in the snow. They felt very sad that she had died alone in the freezing cold night. They did not know the beautiful truth. No one knew about the wonderful visions she had seen. No one knew about the warm iron stove or the delicious roasted goose. No one knew about the magnificent Christmas tree or the bright shining stars. They could not imagine the glorious joy she felt when she saw her dear and loving old grandmother again. They did not know that she had entered the new year in absolute happiness. She was not suffering in the cold anymore. She was wrapped in the warm and loving arms of her grandmother. The little match girl had finally found the peace and warmth she always wanted. Her sad, earthly journey was completely over. This is the end of the story about the little match girl. It is a very famous fairy tale written by Hans Christian Andersen. The story is very sad, but it is also very beautiful. It teaches us important lessons about life and about how we treat other people. Let us talk about these lessons. One important lesson is about compassion and kindness. The little girl was walking in the cold streets while other people were warm inside their houses. No one stopped to help her or buy her matches. If just one person had shown her some kindness, her life might have been saved. We must always help others. The story also teaches us to appreciate what we have. Many of us have warm homes and plenty of food to eat. We have warm clothes and comfortable beds. The little match girl had none of these things. We should be very thankful for our blessings and never take our comfortable lives for granted today. Let us look at the English words used in this story. The word freezing means very cold. When the weather is freezing, you need to wear a thick coat and a warm hat. The little girl had no warm clothes, so she was freezing in the snow. Practice saying the word freezing out loud now. Another interesting word is vision. A vision is something beautiful you see in your mind or in a dream. The little girl saw a vision of a warm stove and a roasted goose. These visions made her feel happy and safe for a short time. Can you think of a beautiful vision in your mind? The word transparent means you can see through something. When the little girl struck the match, the brick wall became transparent. She could see the dining room through the wall. Glass windows are transparent because we can see through them. Try to find something transparent in your room right now and say the word transparent. The word magnificent means extremely beautiful and impressive. The little girl saw a magnificent Christmas tree in her vision. It was decorated with bright candles and colorful ornaments. You can use the word magnificent to describe a beautiful sunset or a wonderful painting. Practice using the word magnificent when you speak English with your friends. The story uses the word pity. Pity means feeling sad for someone who is suffering. The people felt pity when they found the little girl in the morning. But pity without action is not enough. We must turn our pity into helpful actions. We must try to help those who are poor and very hungry. Hans Christian Andersen wrote many famous fairy tales. He often wrote about poor and forgotten people. He wanted his readers to feel sympathy for those who suffer. He used simple words to tell very powerful stories. Reading his stories is a great way to learn English and to learn about human emotions at the same time. Notice how the story uses contrast to make the feelings stronger. Contrast means showing the difference between two things. The story contrasts the freezing cold street with the warm and bright visions. It contrasts the dark night with the bright light of the matches. This contrast makes the story very interesting and easy to understand. The warm stove represents comfort and safety. The roasted goose represents food and nourishment. The Christmas tree represents joy and celebration. The grandmother represents pure love and family connection. The little girl needed all of these things. Her visions showed exactly what her heart and body desired most in the cold and lonely winter night. When you learn English, it is helpful to read stories that make you feel strong emotions. Emotional stories are easier to remember. When you remember the feelings, you also remember the new vocabulary words. The story of the little match girl is very memorable because it touches our hearts and makes us think about life. You can practice your English by retelling this story to a friend. Try to use the new words we learned today. Use words like freezing and vision and transparent and magnificent. Describe the cold night and the bright matches. Describe the beautiful visions and the loving grandmother. Retelling stories will improve your speaking skills quickly. Listening to fairy tales also helps you understand English grammar naturally. You hear how sentences are built and how verbs are used in the past tense. For example, the story says she struck a match and she saw a vision. These are past tense verbs. Pay attention to these verbs when you listen and read. Let us review the moral of the story once more. The moral is the main lesson we learn from reading. The moral is to be kind to people who have less than we do. We should open our eyes to the suffering around us. We should share our warmth and our food with those in need. We can all be a light in the dark world for someone else. Just like the small match brought light to the dark alley, your kindness can bring hope to a sad person. A small act of kindness can make a huge difference. Remember the little match girl and try to be kind every day. Thank you for joining Fairy Tales English Journey today. We hope you enjoyed this classic story and learned some new English words. Learning a new language takes time and practice, but stories make the journey fun and meaningful. Keep listening and keep practicing your English every single day to become more fluent and very confident. If you liked this video, please share it with your friends who are also learning English. Sharing beautiful stories is a great way to help others learn. You can talk about the story together and practice your new vocabulary. Learning together makes the process much more enjoyable and helps you remember the words much better. Please leave a comment below and tell us what you think about the story. Did the story make you feel sad or hopeful? What was your favorite vision that the little girl saw? We love reading your comments and practicing English with you. Your thoughts and opinions are very important to our wonderful learning community. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more beautiful fairy tales and English lessons. We will continue to bring you wonderful stories from around the world. Until next time, stay warm and be kind to others. Keep shining your bright light in the world. Goodbye and see you in the next amazing video.
Top 10 Best Sentences to Learn English. Number 1. Let us learn English while we explore her heartbreaking vision of warmth and light. Explanation. This sentence uses the conjunction while to connect two simultaneous actions. It also uses the powerful adjective heartbreaking to describe a situation that causes deep sadness. Number 2. Snow fell heavily from the dark sky. Explanation. This is a perfect example of using an adverb, heavily, to modify a verb, fell, to create a clear and vivid picture of the weather. Number 3. She shivered in the bitter wind as she walked alone through the quiet and dark city streets. Explanation. This sentence uses bitter as an adjective to describe extreme, painful cold, and shivered to describe the physical reaction to that cold. Number 4. She was afraid her father would beat her if she returned with empty hands. Explanation. This sentence demonstrates a conditional structure and uses the common idiom with empty hands, which means failing to bring back what was expected, such as money or goods. Number 5. One small match could warm her freezing fingers for a short moment. Explanation. The use of could expresses possibility, while the phrase for a short moment is a useful temporal expression to describe something of very brief duration. Number 6. The wall suddenly became transparent, like a thin veil. Explanation. This sentence introduces the advanced vocabulary word transparent and uses a simile, like a thin veil, to describe a magical transformation. Number 7. They flew high above the earth where there was no cold and no hunger. Explanation. This sentence uses a relative clause starting with where to describe a setting and uses the repetition of no to emphasize the absence of suffering. Number 8. We should be very thankful for our blessings and never take our comfortable lives for granted today. Explanation. This contains the important idiomatic expression take for granted, which means to fail to appreciate something because you assume it will always be there. Number 9. The story also teaches us to appreciate what we have. Explanation. This is a useful structure for summarizing the theme or moral of a story, using the verb appreciate to mean recognizing the value of something. Number 10. A small act of kindness can make a huge difference. Explanation. This is a very common and useful English idiom. Make a difference means to have a significant effect on a person or a situation.